Hello, and welcome to the first and probably last episode of Let's Talk About It. I am your host, Corianne, and I want to talk today about African art history and how it's racist, largely because of the Anglo view. We're gonna start out busting out of the gates with something beautiful, something gorgeous, the Igbo shell. The Igbo shell has these tiny little hashes and stipplings on it, like very detailed, intricate work, made even more impressive by the fact that it is literally bronze. It is actual metal that has been casted by a culture that has been deemed primitive. It literally had the art world shook at the time. They could not believe that they found it in Africa. They were like, genuinely, truly thought they were too dumb to do it. Moving on from that, in a very similar vein, the Ife seated figure, it's terracotta and bronze, still a lost wax casting of bronze, but it has been so beautifully decorated, it's so proportionate and accurate, like realistic to the human body, that the person who was discovered at the time, Leo Frobens, he was like, it is so exquisite, it is so beautiful, that I think possibly the Grecian lost city of Atlantis was here. He thought that the lost city of Atlantis, or some European who wildly ended up in this place in Africa, if Atlantis was too much of a stretch, made the art, and that was more reasonable than the people living in the area. Apparently this was a trend though, because Cecil Rhodes, when he went to the Great Enclosure in Zimbabwe and found it, he was like, this is nice, and he called up a little, well, let's not say call, he like wrote an archaeologist friend and had them like caravan their happy ass down to Africa and look at everything so they could come together and create an imaginary race of white Africans. Like, he was like, they weren't albinos, they were completely white Africans. They must have made this wonderful structure, and that is why we have a claim to the rights of everything inside of Africa. He basically tricked them so he would have justification for going to Africa and raping it of its resources. But she went there, she discovered all his secrets, and she came back, and in the very sexist, racist time, she was like, he's wrong. He's 100% wrong. He's wrong, so wrong. It has to be fraudulent. He's actually so damn wrong, because there's no evidence whatsoever in any way, shape, or form that there was ever anyone except the people of Zimbabwe in Zimbabwe. And that was just a tasty morsel of history knowledge for me that my professor gave me that I'm now giving to you. But even worse than just straight up saying that an imaginary race of white Africans existed is the fact that when people discovered the Easter Islands, they spent a bunch of time studying the Easter Island heads, which they didn't even realize had bodies at the point, and they were like, probably aliens. Like, the proof that we have of the civilization that was here was too primitive to be able to carve and move these sculptures like this. It had to be aliens. There's no way they could carve these tall sculptures like this. When in fact, they did carve the sculptures. When they say they got up and walked, they did. They did get up and walk with ropes, because they walked them down there. It's not that hard. Many people have done the same thing if you have like a heavy box and you're by yourself. Like, you genuinely think that cultures that weren't Anglo-Saxon in origin or just so helpless without any sort of Caucasian help that they needed aliens. Aliens are more likely than the fact that this indigenous culture was able to take care of itself. Aliens are more likely. There was no Gertrude for that one. They just had to wait for Mythbusters to figure it out. Which, if it took Mythbusters to do it, I don't understand why scholars couldn't figure it out. You see what you want to see. That is my point for that one. But those were cultures that are pretty much gone by the time they got there, or the world got less pillagey before they got there. Unfortunately, this was not the case for everyone. As we know, there was a large slave trade and such that happened in Africa, and when this was happening, there was a lot of looting, a lot of actual pillaging, just no even attempts for democracy anymore at that point. Like, when the Asante, when the Anglo-Saxons reached the Asante, they were making things like this box. They were making bronze castings that were incredibly intricate and had a lot to do with their own mythologies. And I'm not going to say mythologies. They had to do with their own religion. They had a lot of figures made after their god that shaped the human womb. Ooh, that's a name I cannot say. But they had a lot of figures like that, like the ones holding down the items that are loose on this gold box. The box's decor is goats and rams. It has a lot to do with the mythology, the mythology of the Asante people, and our historians don't know much about it past that. But the box itself is cast bronze meant to hold exclusively gold dust. Gold was extremely precious to the Asante, and they had a lot of access to it, and they didn't want to waste any of it though. So they would put the gold dust in these little boxes to make sure that you didn't lose any. Unfortunately for them, gold, God, and glory were what the Europeans were after, and they were holding a big G. Alright. The Asante were not interested in the Europeans, however. They did not want anything to do with them. So the Europeans found a tribe that didn't want anything to do with the Asante. And they were like, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. We both have a common enemy. And they teamed up and attacked the Asante and almost wiped the people out. Like the entire race. Through the Anglo-Asante Wars. The next thing I want to talk about is another form of looted art, the Nkisi Nkondo. The Nkisi Nkondo are a sculpture from the Congo, which weren't actually a sculpture. It's actually just it's not to the people anyway. It is the physical representation in the home of a spirit that keeps them in balance with the world and keeps their lives just, keeps karma balanced, essentially. But in real time, instead of having to wait for you to elevate into the next cast, the Anglos, when they came to the area, killed and stole the Nkisi. And I say Anglos because it was 3 different European nations that came to the Congo, and they burned, raped, and pillaged their way across the area. And when they did that, each different country, Belgium, France, and Portugal, each came and killed thousands of the Ngongas, or the shaman that communicated and knew the secrets of the Nkisi and could communicate that to the people so they could work together. They killed thousands of them. They burned thousands of Nkisi, and they stole the rest and put them in museums. And they won't give them back. That's what a lot of this work won't be returned to the countries that they came from, because the racism persists to now, when in the art world they think casually, probably without even realizing how racist it does in fact sound, that well, we're taking such good care of it. We bought it. Not all of these things were raped and pillaged. Like, some of these things were bought off of people who did the raping and pillaging. Some of these things were bought off of the black market, like the thing we're going to talk about next. And technically, we have the receipt, so it belongs to us. I would like to take a side note and say that if you are in pretty much any country and you are in possession of stolen goods, whether you bought them from someone or you just stole them yourself, you're in trouble pretty much either way. If I go out and steal a car and sell it to someone, we're both in trouble. Because they're driving a stolen car and I sold it to them. You understanding? Anyway, moving on. The DNA sculpture of the seated figure has, what's it called? The Ife seated figure is the seated figure of Tada, just in case. This is a different seated figure. This is a seated figure of DNA. But he's twisted in this, like, weird thing. He looks, like, tired and kind of out of it, and has these big bumps on his back. And from the studying that the art historians have done so far, they've come to the consensus that this is a figure depicting of someone sick and trying to maybe tell the story of how what happened, like depict what's going on around them as far as a plague that happened among the people, because there's a couple of more sculptures like this that have the same kind of bumps but in a less patterned way, more random. This makes us believe that this is potentially maybe them bloodletting to a bump or some sort. This item was looted, however, so we don't know the circumstances in which it was found, and like can't carbon date the dirt around it or anything like that, because it was taken from some random dig site, from someone's home, who knows, and sold on the black market, and then bought by a museum. I said it correctly. A museum bought something off the black market. Technically, they didn't buy it off the black market. They had a buyer buy it off the black market in their interest. But you're still dealing with the black market. It genuinely does not feel like that should be allowed. Now, I don't know if you can necessarily call this racist per se, as you can call this just treating a people as if they're not a people, more like cattle. And I don't even think you should treat animals in this way. But when Napoleon went to go and attack Egypt and ultimately ended up finding the Rosetta Stone, he went just to secure the interests of France, but mostly to mess with Britain. Basically brought an army to take Alexandria and Cairo and mess up British trade supplies with India and keep them from interrupt their trade routes. While he was doing a Napoleon in Egypt, he discovered the Rosetta Stone, basically the secret to language, and was like, whoop, that's mine. Yet another precious piece of history stolen from where it was found. I mean, ultimately it did lead to people deciphering the hieroglyphics and being able to understand a lot more about Egyptian history and the things like the incredible advancements of the Egyptian societies, but it also is a little salty now because France is no longer in possession of the Rosetta Stone. France is one of the few countries who has decided to return the looted items from their colonial past, and also the looted items that they had in their possession. Unfortunately for us, France sold the Rosetta Stone to Britain a while ago, and now it is sitting inside of a British museum that has outwardly come out saying that they don't want to give back any of their looted artworks because they are afraid that the African people can't handle it. And also, we bought it. It's mine. You know? Pretty sure we just went over this. This is the Oba and his attendants from the Benin Kingdom. The Oba was this big, large, and in charge Black Panther, essentially, of the tribe. In the way that he was a warrior chief, and he is depicted with no shield because I'm a bad bitch and I don't need a shield because you can't hit me, you'll never land a finger on me, and if you do, you better kill me. Is essentially how that way. That's pretty much what I found from like Oba war attitude. But they were also really good leaders, and as such, they had a lot to trade. They were also on the coast, so they had a lot of like copper, brass, like ivory, different coral things, like a lot of really beautiful stuff. And the Europeans, I guess, got tired of negotiations and had the green-eyed monster in their eyes, and they came under the guise of coming for the crown to do some kind of, like, there was some grim need for, like, in the history books it says there was some grim need for them to go and to have the attack on the Benin culture, like the raid, basically, where they sacked the city, which is set everything on fire and take all of the valuables, which is literally pillaging. Like, I don't know how else to say. It's pillaging. Like, they invaded and pillaged the people that they had once traded with. Anyway, fewer than 100 of the plaques that were stolen from the Benin actually ended up selling to the British people, like the British crown officers. Most of the ivory, the textiles, the gold sculptures, the plaques, the brass, pretty much all of that ended up in the hands of random sailors, officers, attendants, like anybody who was there pretty much. It was basically a free-for-all after they came to take everything. After they attacked and ruined the civilization. Another civilization that they attempted to do this to, but who was not having it, was Hawaii. Hawaiians are very kind. They're very welcoming. When the Europeans first showed up on the island, they welcomed them. They had a great time. They were like, bring all your people on board. We'll give you food. We'll have a little party. We'll do a little dance. You could stay for a little bit. Very quickly did they overstay their welcome. Instead of them thinking, oh, they're just welcoming us, they thought, they think we're gods. If you've seen The Road to El Dorado, they thought exactly that. They were like, well, they're worshipping us, we might as well take whatever we want, and started stealing and forcing themselves on women. So the Hawaiians ran them out of town. They had been gifted a crown and cape, but when they were running them out of town, I'm pretty sure they wanted that back. Like, it was a gift, but also, now you're gonna fucking die. The man they gifted it to, Captain Cook, did in fact die. However, the cape and the crown ended up transported across the ocean, along with the story of Captain Cook's heroic death, trying to defend them from the savages. Anyway, Captain Cook ended up a hero, and there's this disgusting painting of him being painted and like sending off his little crewmates and telling them like, live, forget about me. It's pretty much how it feels. And all the Hawaiians who were really just mad that he came and was like messing up their town after they were so kind to him and showed him such hospitality, and they're portrayed as like savage, basically animals, just like angry, throwing spears, like not properly clothed, like, which is hot, so properly clothed. But basically, I say all this to say, like, if you look at all these examples, if you look at how they're written about, if you're looking about, and then you actually look into them like I did, it was awful. All of it is awful. Every single bit of it is underhanded, sneaky, and just theft. Basically, it's just, how can I steal something today? Like, they went from stealing, like they went from stealing from the cultures to stealing the land from the cultures to stealing the country. It's literally the basis for colonialism is this pillaging. The basis for a lot of the modern day civilizations is pillaging. It's violence. It's theft. And like, we need to rethink that entire structure. We need to look at all of it, because art, it's not just art history that's like this. Excuse me. Art history just has the most blatant examples, because you can tell both sides of this story. You can see what happened on both sides of this story, as there wasn't an actual war in most cases. It was just someone being attacked and then those people going on to tell the truth. In a lot of wars that like the Americans and things went into, the losers of those don't get to write their own history books. They are dead or assimilated into what is now greater America, and they're made to believe like, oh, we did this for a reason, and the reason was definitely not greed. It was definitely not greed or envy, even though that is pretty much the whole reason. Gold, God, and glory means nothing. If you truly feared God, then you wouldn't do the things that you did. Like, they weren't just pillaging the land. They were taking the people. They were raping women and children. They were making them fight. They were making them work. They were stealing them away from their families and separating them from their families purposely to make it harder for them to band together and leave. They bred them like cattle, like animals. Because you're strong and you're strong, so you'll make me a strong slave. They treated people inhumane. And that needs to be addressed. In art history and most history books, we need to stop letting things sugarcoat. Stop saying, oh, well, it's not that bad, or it was a long time ago. Because these are painful memories currently. These are things that are currently being addressed and ignored. Case in point, as I said previously, the fact that the museums, not only in Britain but across the world, will not give back their stolen items. A lot of these places had colonial museums and they closed them down, but Belgium recently reopened theirs because we did it and we stole it, and now we're saying we stole it, so what are you going to do about it? Like, the museum's open. They closed them down because they were like, well, you're not telling anybody that the art was stolen. Like, they don't really know about the thing. Like, you didn't buy that from those countries. It was stolen. Like, close it down. And so Belgium basically was like, yeah, we stole it. And what are you going to do about it? And there's literally no incentive to return those things because no one takes it seriously. Everybody's like, well, it was hundreds of years ago. But the effects are still being felt. African civilization is still recoiling from all of this Western influence in the middle of very crucial developmental times for a lot of these cultures. And letting this racism, continue to be taught as fact in art classes and regular history classes is criminal. It is literally making false the history that is being taught over time. It is erasing certain truths that are not flattering to certain groups and making other groups look worse to flatter those groups. Until I was in I think 7th or 8th grade, I genuinely thought that they did not know about Africa or anything like that until 1500. I thought it was 1493 that they figured out where Africa was. But Africa had been, Morocco had been trading with, Portugal for a long time. Arabic countries had been traveling down into Africa to spread Islam since, the beginning of the 1400s. They knew it was there. They just decided after they figured out how to make guns and gunpowder and how to truly decimate these countries who were having not I'm not gonna say underdeveloped because they were developed enough for them. They were living solid lives, happy lives. They took their new technology and that they made for bombs and bullets and guns, and they took it down to less developed cultures who had not that technology and used it to decimate them, to commit genocides, multiple genocides. They almost killed entire generations, not generations, entire cultures, entire peoples, and sometimes they did, and we don't talk about it enough. They talk about the genocides that Africans committed against other Africans less than they talk about the genocides that were caused by colonialisms, the first genocides in Africa. And that's really what I want y'all to think on. If you have any thoughts or questions, we can talk about it in the comments. Like, subscribe, have a good day.